not every organization, but my experience is stay in your lane, keep your mouth shut, do your job. And if that's okay in your career, you can do quite well. That wasn't really I was beginning to realize at that stage of my career that it wasn't really my personality.
Welcome to the You Are a Lawyer podcast. Steve Weigler, how are you today?
Everything's good. How about you?
I am doing well. I'm doing very, very well. But Steve, you and I were just chatting offline about being lawyers, your dad being a dentist. Will you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to go to law school?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always interested in criminal law, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it was just from like watching television growing up and just being interested in more than the average person about a police stop. I'm from Milwaukee, and it's kind of a segregated town, so you would see, and we all knew what part of town we were supposed to live in,
Yeah.
kind of that kind of city. And so I became interested in like justice and um, why the arrest rates were different. Anyway, I just always had that real um, refined interest, and also uh, have read newspapers since I've been like 3 years old. Like just constantly reading newspapers. I became like it's almost obsessive. So anyway, between those, it just was like, well, what other career path is there where you kind of put those things together? Intellectually
Yeah.
curious, um, social justice, all those things. And I started out by working for Congress when I got out of undergrad, and I worked on Capitol Hill, and so it was like kind of a like, do I do policy or do I go to law school? And first of all, at the time, law school was a lot cheaper than it is now. So it was. I mean, it's. I don't know the same if I make the same career decisions knowing the price of a
Yeah.
legal education now. But the what happened is I was working on the Hill, and everyone was going to law school, and I'm like, um, and then the committee I was working on disbanded, so I was going to have to find another job anyway, and I'm like, well, it's probably meant to be. Um, but when I went to law school, I really focused on the areas I was passionate about. And what's weird is, and we'll get into this, is now I kind of practice everything else, like everything else that I mean, I had to learn it in law school for the bar, corporations,
Yeah.
tax, all that stuff. But now that's all the stuff I practice with. And that's an interesting story, which I'll share.
So you're interested in the city is segregated and why is this happening? You're reading the newspaper at 3 years old. You start in Capitol Hill. Did you know
Yeah.
any lawyers, or was it just from TV and the newspapers that you were like, I bet being a lawyer would be interesting, or working on Capitol Hill would be interesting?
Yeah. It was more conceptual. I mean, I knew lawyers, but they were growing up, but it was like Mr. So and so, and I didn't know what they did,
Yeah.
and I don't think they were courtroom attorneys, or very few of them. What happened was, so I go to law school, I'm doing my thing, and it was either I wanted to be a prosecutor or a public defender. That was it, and so, and I wanted to do it in a really big city. So I got my first internship through political connections, mostly through the New York County DA's office, and I worked in Manhattan. And then after that, I worked in Miami. I had no idea that I didn't want to live in Miami. I didn't know anything about Miami. I mean, we
Yeah.
went there when I was like 5 years old, but it was just not high on my list. But I went to the first interview was at the law school. The second interview was at I think at my law school, and the third they're like, well, you have to go down to Dayton and meet with the actual prosecutor. So I drive down to Dayton, which is about 4 hours from Cleveland, if I recall, and get there. And Janet Reno was the DA for Miami, and for those of your listeners are young, she was the Attorney General, um, and but she was the DA for Miami at the time. And I show up early, and we end up having this like 2 hour conversation. I'm like, well, this lady's really cool. I really like her. And so it's like, well, Miami. All right, well, Miami it is. So I got the job and I moved down to Miami and I lived there for 5 years. What I realized is, well, criminal law is really tough, and Miami's a really tough city. I know it's glossy, it looks good, and it is. I guess if you have a lot of money, it's a very nice city. But
Yeah.
as far as like the underbelly of Miami, it's tough. It's a really tough city. So between being a Midwesterner, moving down to a tough city, and just getting involved in it, I realized I don't want to. Everyone else is at lunch. Every other attorney, or you know, they have they're in their air conditioned offices, and I'm sitting in a lockup. Um, and so it's really not. It wasn't a keeper.
Yeah.
So already, I'm 26 years old at the time, maybe 28. Um, I hit a crossroads. I don't want to be in the city I'm in. Um, Man, maybe I would have if I would have picked another career path. But and I
Hmm.
really, everything I'm worked up to be, I didn't want to be. Everything is so intense in criminal law. Like it's either intense or you get over it, and it's like, you're waiting for a jury or whatever. Um, you're talking about someone's life. Uh, there's a lot of gory details, and it was just
Yeah.
like, I think I made a smart move on that part, but I just was really like, and then you see what the lifestyle is of the attorneys and their health, even the successful ones, they don't look healthy. Um, so it's just like I've made a career move, and I was either going to go back to school and get more into my policy background, um, and apply for like masters of public policy programs, or I was just going to. I met my wife in Miami, and we were just going to pack up the car and move out to Denver because this is where I went to undergrad. And I'm like, well, I, I if I'm gonna, I don't have a definite career path at this point.
Yeah.
And at the time, it always seems like I was looking for jobs in recessions, like real recessions. So that was another
Yeah.
one. It's like the economy wasn't really good, so it wasn't like people were looking for attorneys. And I had a criminal law background. Um, that's a specialty. That's a niche. And so, and it wasn't white collar or anything. So anyway, long story short, I moved out here. And so it was like the first stage of my rebuilding, and got whatever job I could, and took business school courses at night to kind of um, flesh out my ability to get a career that I was interested in, and worked at a civil law firm for a while. But then I got a job as corporate counsel in telecommunications, and so I was an attorney for AT&T, um, for about 6 years, and traveled all over the country and learned a ton about corporations and how a really large enterprise works. So
Yeah.
that was in the mid 2000s, and um, I that was a, a really good experience, between that. But at that time of my career, between that and working for the DA's office and working for Congress, those were my three jobs at the time. All I did was work for really large organizations, like really large. And so, you know, I think at that point I wasn't really sure that I even understood entrepreneurism,
Hmm.
or that people you're just kind of pigeonholed into doing what you're supposed to do. And every time I try and do what was right for the to just get the job done, I would step on someone's toes. Um, you really just are. There's those are good skills to know. Meaning, like, stay in your lane. You're going to get rewarded more, I think, in not every organization, but my experience is stay in your lane, keep your mouth shut, do your job. Um, and if that's okay in your career, um, you can do quite well. Uh, that wasn't really my. I was beginning to realize at that stage of my career that it wasn't really my personality. I'm more like, all right, well, this person has a problem. Um, let's dissect the problem. Let's build a relationship
Yeah.
and let's get it done. So, anyway, so I'm sorry to ramble on and on and on.
No, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to see and for you to explain how you've been in multiple different organizations because different organizations, different environments pull different things out of us, right? Here you are from Milwaukee. You went to undergrad in Colorado. And then you and I were talking before the recording started that you went to law school in Cleveland. What made you look towards Cleveland from Colorado?
It was really, I was sitting on Capitol Hill and the committee was disbanding. I That was about April, and so I was just looking for law schools that would take late applications,
Okay.
and then I just wrote down late applications that would take me. Like Harvard might have taken a late application, but
Yeah.
I wasn't on the list for Harvard. So it was kind of like,
Okay.
all right, well, let's list the ones that. And I thought I went to Case Western Reserve, which I thought was kind of an underappreciated gem. It's like either people have heard of it and a great school or
Hmm.
never heard of it. So,
Yeah.
and I thought, listen, if anyone's thinking about law school, I thought, whoa, what an amazing education. I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
enjoy it that much, but it was like, whoa, this is about as rigorous as I've ever seen. It's mostly an engineering school. It's just like, oh my God,
Yeah.
study, 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 study. So anyway, that was a shocker to me too. I mean, again,
Yeah.
Midwestern kid from and spent most of my time in Colorado, and then going through
Yeah.
that, and deep between that DC and and then going to law school with a bunch of people from the East Coast, and um,
Yeah.
to
And then from that to Miami. So that's what I'm
yeah,
trying to track.
Miami's tough.
Milwaukee.
So at this point, I'm a much so by the time I get to Denver, I'm a much tougher person
Yeah.
than when I left Colorado. I mean,
Yeah.
I wasn't tough, but
You've seen everything. But I mean,
yeah,
being geographically diverse is really important, right? And I think that does bring a lot out of us because if you are able to adapt and learn and succeed in different environments, that does pull more out of you than if you would have just stayed in Milwaukee or if you would have stayed in Colorado the whole time, right? It does change
yeah.
you.
Well,
So,
and we talked before that we started the podcast about taking risks, and I looked at it like my dad was a professor of dentistry at Marquette University, which is in Milwaukee. I think I could have gone for undergrad free, law school free, um, and I just was like, I'd rather be in an uncomfortable situation and learning something, um, and seeing the world because you only live once, right?
yeah.
So that's always how I've looked at it. But then sometimes I go, rarely, but I go back to Milwaukee and I'm like, wow, those people live good lives. Look at their nice house. Wow, really nice quality of life.
Yeah,
And so I get both sides. It's just like you have to be true to you.
you
And so
do.
I think, and as I continue my career journey, you'll see that I then become somewhat, once I did my own startup, which is my next endeavor, I became somewhat unemployable in the legal world. So because it's just like my experiences are so, not that they're not focused. I always thought they were focused, but
Yeah,
they're different. Like I work with people that still work at large law firms, or and we don't even speak the same language as far as career. Um,
yeah,
and so um, then there's a point, I think a tipping point in my life at least, where it's like I'm all I got. Like I have to just build up on my experiences and make sure that they're marketable and more importantly, um, client centered and important that the client can take my experiences and really I can be a value add
yeah,
compared to my competitors. So um, so going back to, yes, at that time I'm like, all right, well, I'm way different, and AT&T ends up getting bought by SBC. So the company I work for no longer exists. So
mm-hmm.
for 2 years before, so it's like I get hired, you get this package of benefits. They hired somebody to go through all the benefits you get. Like it's like, whoa, this is really good. And I get in trouble for like not staying at the. Everyone else was staying at the Four Seasons, and I was like, well, save some money for the company, or I'm just used to saving money or whatever. I book a trip at the Hilton, and I get in trouble because it makes everyone else look, you know, like like that they're spending too much.
Yeah,
So anyway, there's all these types of things. That I'm like, all right, well, I'll just stay at the Four Seasons next time. Oysters are fine with me. So anyway, it's just like it went from that to being like, all right, we got to trim the balance sheet. Like, we got it. So fought like 2 rounds of layoffs, and it just started kind of disintegrating. But what happened? So
yeah,
for two years before it got bought, my supervisor, who I'm still close with, um, was super cool, like a super cool manager. He would tell us everything. He would be as honest as possible. He's like, you guys better start looking, and this field is melting. Telecom used to be hot. Then it was like, there's no regulation anymore. It's like there's nothing to do. So I'm like, oh my God, another situation where I just really am kind of hitting a plank here. I have no marketable practice. I have no clients. And so I'm like, hey, I'm gonna study. So I had 2 years to just sit at my desk and get paid. And I started I started researching. Well, how do people get into this position? And then I started thinking about lower socioeconomic populations and like how are they ever going to get if I'm at this position, super educated, super motivated, don't really have too many issues. Food on the table stuff. How do they get motivated? And so I built this company. We found this predictive. I found this predictive analytic at the University of Wisconsin, and built this company that was focused on curriculum and assessment and professional development. And the mantra's right here on how to get focused on mostly free and reduced lunch populations in inner city schools, and how to get them internally motivated, like what exploring what their own issues are and how to overcome those issues. It was kind of heavy stuff, but we made it kind of
Yeah.
um, accessible. And the most important thing is we could tell the teachers and guidance counselors through this assessment which kids these kids were.
Yeah.
So talk about like a risk, and it was a curriculum company, and so it was a real business. It was a real business model, and at times we were very successful, but it was also a mission driven company. It's not like um, I could have found easier ways to build a company,
Yeah.
and it was
But I
also
mean,
yeah.
but it sounds like from everything I've heard from you before that this was more your speed because you were trying to problem solve. You were trying to dig a layer deeper and be like, well, no, let's really get to the root. And now you get to work with this organization and you guys are actually solving problems. You're actually impacting people's lives, right? So
It
the
was
dichotomy might
that
look
part. Yeah,
weird on paper, but it sounds like it was more fulfilling for you.
it was very fulfilling. The only problem is it was super capital intensive. So you don't just
Mm,
um,
yeah.
because first of all, school districts must have the curriculum buyers and the superintendents are PhDs or they're educated people. They're educated,
Yeah.
um, and they they also don't want to waste. They don't have a ton of money to waste, and it requires a systems change. And it was just a really complicated sale. So it was and then I really needed big school districts. So my biggest client was like Fort Lauderdale, and these are huge school districts. Maybe not the world's biggest cities, but for school districts, how they
Yeah.
plan. Um, Clark County, which was like the nation's third, Los Angeles. I mean, it's just huge systems. Um, and so uh, between the sales cycle and just real business challenges. And then my investors, I probably didn't find the right investors. I had to find millions of dollars, and they were just they became impatient, because the return
Hmm.
on we kept on getting bigger, but that cost more. We
Yeah.
would then want to put more services into it. It was like what I started was just kind of skeletal. What we could have
Yeah.
done with it would have been huge, but it needed a huge capital investment. And
Yeah.
at the end, the whole experience, and it was a long experience, but it was the good, the bad, the ugly. We almost sold it, came really close, and that at the last minute didn't work out for some funky, crazy reason. Um, and it just was like, and then I just kind of lost control of the board. So the experience itself was really super. The mission was amazing.
Hmm.
The product was like incredible. What we were doing is really life changing, but
Yeah.
but the experience of doing a startup in a business and adding it to this is not something that anyone's ever seen before. Made it like we were creating a market, made it almost impossible. Like it was like so hard, and it really took a lot out of me um, psychologically. And at the time when I finally had like we had a board and I just raised a whole new round of money, and they wanted to control the board, and I'm like, I was just tired. My dad was passing away, and I gave them board control, and then they kicked me out.
Mm.
So I really had talk about corporate lessons, which if any of you you need counsel on this, I'm a really good person to talk to because it's like a lot of times if you're in a first, I mean, you have to think twice about raising venture capital But if you do, you have to be. Of course, it's flattering that someone's going to give you a ton of money,
Yeah.
but it's there's a lot to think about. Anyway, through that, I'm like again fourth career change where I'm like, it's not like I was like I'm sick of this. It's like I don't have a plan. And so my wife, I was sitting in the bay. I had all these ideas, business ideas, but I think it was more I was on a manic run, meaning like I was like just running on adrenaline. I was
Mm-hmm.
doing wine business and like anyway, just anything to keep my mind going. Um, but she finally said, "Well, Steve, just sit in the with a piece of paper and figure out write down your skills and just do that." And so that led me to my, which is kind of my capstone, and it's like really going well. Is my law firm, Emerge Counsel, which we focus on business and IP, and um, the IP mostly branding and marketing, which leads to my red glasses because that's my brand. Um, but everyone has to have a brand, and every
Yeah.
business should have a brand. And anyway, um, I started small, and we're still a boutique law firm, really focused on basically all what I've learned in life. And so it's
Yeah.
relatively empathetic and holistic because my clients are business owners, mostly small and medium sized businesses that want to grow. Some of them are at exit, meaning we're doing their acquisition or the merger into the new company. But we kind of, I build, I know a few things in business. You need to build a strong relationship with your client where it's not just like, oh, the contract, all right, I'll get back to you. Here it is for you're buying 500 widgets at $500. Um,
Yeah.
it's really like, well, what's your motivations? What's your uh, what? How can I help you? And how can we build a meaningful relationship? And then really, what steps do we need to take to save you money? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but things that are going to keep you legit and keep you out of trouble. And so that's really a lot of my practice is just empathetic, um, empathetic legal practice. And
Okay.
it's been real fun. Now my clients are all over the world. I just got back from India, um, so I'm,
Very
I'm
cool.
I'm having fun with it. Like everything else, some days more than others.
So when I was working in a law firm, I actually was in the IP section too, but we were doing counterfeits and e-commerce claims.
Mhm.
So my next question to you was going to be, do you have nationwide clients? Because IP law and branding and stuff is federal courts, in the USPTO office and things.
Well, that's interesting. That's my focus is e-commerce. Most of my
Mm,
clients, I'd say like 70% of my clients are e-commerce,
okay.
and we always are dealing with the world of counterfeit, um, which is why I've had to build up the international presence.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of the counterfeits aren't happening in Ohio. It's not like
Hmm.
someone's not they're knocking you off in China or
Yeah.
it's just the nature of the beast. That's where the manufacturers do overruns. It. So the point is I so when I started this practice, uh, I have a cousin that lives in Taiwan, and he's like, Steve, based on what you're trying to do, it sounds like e-commerce would be a good place for you, a really good niche for you, because that's what he does. And not in law, but just he's an
Yeah.
e-commerce um, multimillionaire, actually. So he invited me to a conference. And so I started my clients base, and I just immediately sponsored it or, got a booth up. And that was years ago. And through that, my clients are all over the place, mostly not in Denver. Um, I have a few clients in Denver, but mostly all over the place. Some international clients are trying to get into the U.S. market, and some, um, a lot of times it's also American clients that they get they get an order in Canada. Well, all of a sudden it's an international play. It's not,
Yeah.
and so it's really e-commerce particularly um, fits well with my skill set. Plus, I work with a lot of brokers. I mean, I really understand the field, and so that was kind of luck and circumstance.
Hmm.
I was writing down my skill set um, close with my cousin, and he was like, "Well, Steve," and he introduced me to a few people. Then those people introduced me to a few more people, And
Yeah,
one wonderful thing about that industry is it is very like, sure, we get together sometimes in various places, but it's a very, the nature of e-commerce is like you can sit in your basement and do it. So
absolutely.
a
Absolutely.
lot of my
And
clients are all over the place.
yeah, to your point, the network, once you get into that type of work, is truly international, right? This isn't just one thing that's happening in the States. And so it sounds like Emerge Council can really grow as big as you want it to be because we are just getting to, like, we're just scratching the surface with counterfeits and e commerce law. The firm that I was at, we were trying to do some of the big cases on, like, how do you determine from being an unauthorized seller to finally becoming a manufacturer? Or how do you know that the warranty was broken when you started counterfeiting the stuff? And there weren't case law about it. Like the precedent was just then being created. So it sounds like you'll have work for a really long time, which
Yeah,
is good.
it's, I think the frustrating thing for my clients or anyone's clients is how you create, especially for a small and medium sized business, how do you create a program to deal with counterfeit
Mm-hmm.
um, at a price point you can accept? Um,
Yeah.
so right now, I have a client, for example, that has a um, like a, they have hundreds of SKUs of different art. Well, copywriting each piece of that art would, I mean, thousands of, and that each one maybe only sells, 50. So,
Yeah.
how do you create a program to best enforce against it? And you're right, the laws aren't that gelling, and courts are getting frustrated. Um, it's there's a whole bunch of things. So there's a protection side, like what you
Mm-hmm.
can do up front, build the wall, and of protection, and then there's the enforcement side, like what can you really enforce, and then
Yeah.
what country are you going to have to deal with. But that's really why I just got back from 3 weeks of travel. I was in India, Dubai, Europe, just building those relationships that I need to build. And again, that trip, just like traveling for anything else, it's like some days you're like, you wake up, you're like, no, another, I just want to go home.
Another plane. Oh man.
Yeah. Or like, what, you're like, just trying to piece it together. Where am I? What,
Yeah.
the time change, cultural differences.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway,
that's
it's,
fascinating.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, and then the issue is also, as I think as an attorney or anyone in business, you have to brand yourself. And so
Mm-hmm. You are a
again, we're
brand.
70% of my clients are e-commerce, and that's really my passion industry. I do work in other industries, tech,
Yeah.
um, and some other things, but it's all based on my experience. It's all based on what I know. So if you called me on biotech, I don't know the first thing about it. I don't want to. I mean, it seems lucrative, but it's just not my field. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've really niched out on through the my exercise that my wife made me do.
That's awesome.
Wisely, I just here's what I know, and I'm at the point in my life where it's just like, this is my swan song. This is what I'm going to continue to know. Like you said, I like industry. Telecom was this way too. If there's not that much law in it. It's just so,
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, whoa, what do we do? It's like complex problems because it's like not like um, oil and gas, maybe where drilling has happened for the last 150 years. So you have um, you have a pretty established set of law. This is
Yeah.
not, because this infringement was, the idea is like you have a trademark or copyright. It's not, or a patent. It's not supposed to happen. That's supposed to be the end of the game. But it does all the time, many different ways. And the patent becomes just a piece of paper or a ticket to infringe because you just published your whole idea.
This is true. This is
So
true.
it's like there's a whole bunch of things. It's all
Yeah.
really, you got to be intellectually curious.
You do. And I think even in preparing for this recording, I hadn't realized that you were in e-commerce because my title was literally enforcement coordinator. So we were on that side of it. So very cool.
That sounds like a overwhelming job.
No, because I loved it. I had a great team around me. They let me create the team within the firm. I was able to hire. I wrote the job description. I was pretty strict in making sure I got the people I wanted to work with, and we were great. I left in March 2021, but everything was rolling, and still is. I still have some good relationships with people there. So, Yeah, it was tough, but it was fun because we thought we were like, it was the great new frontier. We're like, oh, what's happening here? I mean, Amazon now is so ubiquitous in everyone's life. And I would say that it was still in 2021, but even more as the years go on, it's getting even more. Um, and when I started in 2016, we were just like, you were still going to a lot of the different retailers. It wasn't all Amazon, which means that also the counterfeiters have increased as well over time. So, anyway, we can
Well,
nerd
and,
out
I
on
mean,
that
and
forever.
if we could a position at Amazon,
Hmm.
that's they change their policies all the time. So
Hmm.
and their operating structure, and it's kind of it can be opaque too. It's not that
Yeah.
easy to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, which is really, and this is just a really interesting story. When I was in India, I was in Bangalore, and a friend of mine's like, well, "I'm going to meet with Amazon," and so I'm like, "Well, can I come?" Like, because in the U.S., I've never met with any. Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
get meetings with Amazon. Like, they're not, to
They're not too
me,
receptive.
they're
Yeah.
not remotely. So anyway, but I sat there for 5 hours that in India, and they were telling me the, the whole the business strategy. The whole thing was so interesting. Anyway, that's what I was just writing my blog about.
Yeah. Very cool. Very, very cool.
So,
So, Steve, I always ask every guest the same question, and we've been talking about it so far, but I would like to know, what would you say to young lawyers, 5 years practicing or less, or law students about what they can do with their law degrees?
well, I think from the moment I went to law school, um, everyone was. Uh, it's not like law professors don't generally, they're they're on their own tangent. They have goals to publish. So you're not exactly getting like great. At least my experience was like great career advice because either they went and worked at a large firm and then became a
Mm-hmm.
professor there, academic and state. So I kind of feel like you get pigeonholed into, this is what attorneys do. They become attorneys, um, and you work for a large law firm, and maybe they circulate you through the different departments, and that's going to be your, you can figure out which one you want to do from that, or which partner you like to work with, and maybe that's what you'll do. I think you're going to be a lot more enlightened if you take some um, potential risks and you can afford to take those risks. And
Yeah.
those risks involve, hey, maybe going to work for a small practitioner, or maybe if you really are like, hey, I'm not sure this is for me. My most successful friends went to law school and aren't practicing law. They never did. Um, and so just I think that doesn't mean that you have to do that, but I mean just keep
Yeah.
your mind open. And how can you do that? But you have to. It's the whole way I built this firm is you have to go and talk to people, and so identify some people that are your idols, or career idols. Maybe not. It's maybe not like Jay-Z or something like it. Meaning like for real. Um, who's
Not
who?
Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, yeah. Someone that you can get to, and someone
Yeah.
that like you really, if it's an NBA player, well, you have to have those skills. And most of us don't. So,
Hmm.
but something real, like, hey, how
Yeah.
did you end up being like? I was just looking up somebody that's COO for Charles Schwab, like that when I went to law school. It's like, how did that happen? Like, what does this person do to get
Yeah.
to that high corporate position? Um, just and was sitting in my law school class. Not
Hmm.
an exceptional memory of the person, but that it's just a person. But what career moves did they make to really be outside of law in the business world? And maybe if your passion's music, maybe it's a music business world.
Hmm.
But you got to talk to people and find out how they got there. And
You do.
those people are gonna have kernels of advice that aren't like, well, I stuck around at this law firm and
Right.
then it happened. It's like that's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Everyone's gonna think of you as a corporate working at a large law firm, um, and you're even before you're going to be able to talk to the client. You're never going because that's a very protective thing sometimes.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
you just really you have to create your own information database, and so that should be your sixth course in law school all the time, or right after law school. It's like, and I was always a little scared to do that,
Hmm.
and I shouldn't have been.
Well, It wasn't something that we saw very often. And that's why this podcast exists. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already pretty curious about taking risk and changing your legal career. Because I talk to people who love practicing law. I talk to people who practice and open a food truck on the weekends. And I talk to people who never were licensed. Because to say that you can do anything with a law degree is the honest truth, right? A legal education is the best foundation. You already know how to mitigate any risk that you get into. You already know how to problem solve. So why not just take the chances and do all the things, right? And that's the whole reason why you and I are here talking right now, because I'm trying to encourage more people to take all the risk and do all the things. Because no one
Well,
told me to do that. And I was a pioneer, and I'm trying to let more people know that this is pretty standard.
and look, you can always come if it doesn't work out. I'm a prime example. I never thought I'd be practicing law again, ever. Like
Yeah.
I always, when the bar dues came up, I was like, well, am I sure I want to pay these? Because I was like on my way, but out of it. But now that I came back to it, number one, you don't forget any of that stuff you learned in law school. Like if you
Never.
bring up UCC 9, I can tell you exactly what's in UCC 9, and then
Yeah.
now it comes up, and they pound in this framework that's really important because it's the structure of everything you need to know about how to practice law, and then your critical thinking. Um, I think if you're going to go outside the field, you have to convince whoever you need to help you that you're trainable. Meaning,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think lawyers, and some lawyers are, they're just so like, well, this side says this, and this, like the first thing you learned in law school to write that legal memo on what all
Mm-hmm.
the arguments are. Well, no one wants to sit and listen to all your arguments. They just want to
Yeah.
listen to what are you going to do? Like, what's the facts? What are you going to? Is there any legal or business reasons we can't do this? And then you analyzed it, move. Can we pull the trigger or not? What do we need to do? And so
Yeah.
it's like quick. It's not like no one has time for sometimes the legal thinking, and they get impatient with the legal process, like
Yeah.
an attorney. And so I've learned that in life. And I think if you're going to approach a career outside of law or even a unique career in law, you really have to shortchange what you've learned, or not
Yeah.
shortchange, but kind of think about that critically too, because that's just how to please a judge or a senior partner.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good point. You have to remind people that you're trainable because, yes, you have this set of skills, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't transfer. And to be honest, it should be easier to convince someone else that you're trainable because by the time you realize you want to step outside of law, that takes a lot of personal work for you to be like, wow, I can do something else. Because at least for me, my identity was being a lawyer. And so then when I started to make money doing other things, I was like, how can I be something other than a lawyer? Right? It was really hard for me to be like, no, this is my job. This is not who I am. So it takes a lot of work to get there and to even remind yourself that you can do other things. A lot of times we get so tied up in the title of our job of being an attorney or being a lawyer that we don't forget there are other things. So,
Yeah, that's completely true, but that's life. I mean, I think,
mm-hmm.
meaning I see a lot of young people in particular, um, their identities are job. And maybe it was more my generation. I don't know. I have to think about that. But your identity and your who you can be two different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why merchcouncil.com. And
Yes.
it was just a pleasure. What a refreshing topic.
Absolutely. To talk about all the things you can do, how a law degree is still valuable, but also
Oh,
you can do all
totally.
these other things.
That it
Yeah.
is. I would not. No, I did some business school work, and I'd give that up. But I mean, there's many ways you can learn how to do. But and my poli sci degree, probably I'd give that up, but not my law degree.
All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Take care now. Bye.